Now we're going to enter the Vatican Museum. Look at this beautiful spiral staircase that leads you into perhaps the largest museum in all of Italy with a fabulous collection. And it's a smart idea to have lunch first before you go walking through these endless corridors. There's a very good cafeteria right inside the Vatican Museum with food at reasonable prices. And now let me tell you about some of my favorite statues. This is one of the most beautiful statues in all of creation. This particular statue here is called the Apollo Belvedere. And it is just one of the finest pieces of art ever created. It's about 2,000 years old. It's actually a Roman version of a Greek original. The Greek piece was probably done around the 3rd century BC in the Hellenistic style. And so this is a Roman version of it that was done about 2,000 years ago, maybe 1st century BC, the Apollo Belvedere. And it has just got such grace and flowing motion, movements, the folds of fabric, the reality of the muscles and the feet and everything about it, and particularly the face, the beautiful, beautiful face. And it just shows that sculpture in those days, 2,000 years ago, attained a state of perfection. You can't do any better than this today if you're trying to create reality. In fact, you can't do this well today. Can't do it. Can't do it. So in some ways, our culture has gone downhill in the last 2,000 years. The profile and then the front look. Originally, he had a bow and arrow. You can see the quiver behind. He's just released the arrow. And that's what the portrait is telling you. He's just fired his bow. And we've lost the arms, but you don't really need the arms to get the impact of the piece. So take a moment to have a good look at it. And let's stay together, because then there's another even more spectacular piece I'm going to show you. So Canova was a sculptor from Venice. And he was from Venice. And he did a lot of work in Rome and Florence. And he did Perseus holding the head of Medusa. Perseus holding the head of Medusa. You see the head with snakes all over it. It's a classical story from antiquity. So this was done during the time of Canova, which was 17th century, 18th century. It's a modern version of the classical style of sculpture. And these two pieces are also by Canova, not quite as important. But the most important sculpture in this section, and in fact, in the entire Vatican Museum, is the Laocoon, and that's across the courtyard. So let's go across the courtyard now and look at the Laocoon. Okay, this statue is called the Laocoon. Laocoon. And it's a Greek statue. This is a Greek original. It was actually carved on the island of Rhodes, which was part of the Greek cultural area, the island of Rhodes. And it was carved about the 2nd century BC. And it was brought to Rome at a very early period. And in fact, apparently the Emperor Nero had this statue in his palace. And that was about the 1st century after Christ, about, say, the year 80. And he had it in as part of his palace, part of the decorations of his palace. And then it was forgotten about, it was buried under dirt, and it was unknown for hundreds of years after that, until 1509, when it was dug up out of the ground by some early archaeologists working. And this is a time of Michelangelo and Raphael and the great Renaissance. So Michelangelo rushed over to the site, and they dug it up, and they were just astonished to find such a piece of perfection. Here they were trying to make their own great carvings. They thought they were doing some pretty good work, and they were. But when they found the Laocoon, this really humbled them and inspired them and gave them a lot of new ideas, a lot of new, fresh ideas. Because of the incredible energy and beauty and perfection of the statue, it's a scene of Laocoon is the central figure, and his 2 children, his 2 sons, are with him. And they're being crushed to death by snakes because they offended the god Apollo. They did something wrong, and Apollo sent the serpents after them, crushed them, and killed them. So this is a brutal scene, and in a sense, you know, it's a scene of telling people, don't violate the gods, because this will happen to you too. But just see the interplay of arms and legs and snakes and the curves, and This is almost a Greek Baroque statue. It's just one of the finest statues ever created in the history of art. We've seen Michelangelo's Pietà, and that's beautiful. We'll see David in Florence, beautiful. Arguably, the Laocoon is the most important statue ever made in world history. And you make up your own minds on that. Nobody can say definitively one way or the other, but there's no doubt this is a beautiful piece. So as a result, the Renaissance artists began copying some of these poses and positions. And when we get to the Sistine Chapel ceiling, you can actually see that Michelangelo adopted some of these poses and movements and put them on the ceiling in some of his characters in the portrait sketches that you'll see. Quite a piece. The coffered ceiling is like a small version of the Pantheon, and in the middle we have this huge marble basin. This is about 2,000 years old, and it's believed to have come from the palace of Nero, the golden palace of Nero, where they also dug up the Laocoon. Imagine that fountain filled with wine or something. Nero's house, Nero's palace was unbelievable. It went for almost a mile, and it had palace after palace all within the same feature, and this would be typical of the kinds of features they had in the golden palace of Nero. Extravagant. You're watching our Hawaii Geographic Society tour of Europe. We travel to Europe several times each year with groups from Hawaii, always open to the public. We start in Rome and end up in London, and this series will continue throughout the next several months following the same route of our trip. All right, this is called the Tapestry Gallery, cleverly enough, and these were all woven in Brussels, in Belgium. You know, the Flemish culture was a very important center of weaving tapestries, Bruges and Belgium, and they're all based on the paintings of Raphael's students depicting scenes from the life of Christ. And then in the next room, it's the Map Gallery, which has extravagant displays on the walls, frescoes of maps of different towns that Rome had conquered, different islands, and a beautiful ceiling painted in the time after Michelangelo, in the late 16th century in the Mannerist style. So we're just going to walk all the way straight through it to the other end. Okay. Now, as we're arriving, this is not our destination by any means. This is not the Sistine Chapel. These rooms that we've been walking through are very beautiful, highly illustrated, almost like a comic book that you're walking through. There's such beautiful, colorful images. But these are not the important rooms in the museum, including this room, as pretty as it is. We're heading for Raphael's stanzas. Raphael, the painter, equally great as Michelangelo. He wasn't as diverse as Michelangelo, but when it came to painting frescoes, Raphael was among the best, decorated the private rooms of the Pope. And that's what's just ahead, and we'll see about 3 of the rooms that painted by Raphael. These were private rooms of the Pope, and after we go through there, I'll tell you about them when we get to them. Then we'll go down to the Sistine Chapel. Okay, now this is one of Raphael's most famous paintings, one of his greatest masterpieces. It's called The School of Athens. And there's many, many things going on in this painting. At the very center, you see the 2 figures with Plato and Aristotle standing in the middle. Plato and Aristotle. And Plato is the one with his hand up. And Aristotle is holding his hand down. And this symbolizes the 2 main schools of Greek philosophy, Plato being the idealist and Aristotle being the materialist, more concerned with the actual material physical world. Plato more interested in the world of ideas and ideal forms and philosophies. So that's the center point of the School of Athens. And it's framed by many interesting characters and figures and architecture. You see the buildings that are framing the figures were actually designed by Bramante, who was one of the great architects of Rome. He didn't actually construct these buildings. He designed the buildings for Raphael, just for the painting. And then Raphael painted the architecture. And it gives you an incredible feeling of depth and perspective. And notice how it frames the central figures. Those two central figures, if they were not standing in that space, you wouldn't even really notice them right away. But as it's framed, your eye is drawn immediately to those two figures. And then with the way they're pointing, one up and one down, it helps your eye explore the rest of the painting. And Leonardo da Vinci is also represented in here, as is Socrates, as are several other important characters from world history, as is Michelangelo. Michelangelo is right in front here. Now, this was at a time when Raphael and Michelangelo were the great rivals working in this place. Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling at the time, and Raphael was working in here at the same time. And Raphael was not getting along very well with Michelangelo, but when Raphael saw the finished work of the Sistine Chapel, he was so overwhelmed, as was everybody in Rome, that he paid homage to Michelangelo by putting him into the painting. But Raphael didn't forget himself either. He put a self-portrait of himself into this painting, and he's here. He's standing over here looking at us. He's this character over here. Here he is. Raphael is right next to the fellow in the white. See the fellow on this far edge in the white, and right next to him is a person looking at you. Well, that's Raphael, a self-portrait of the great man. And if this was painted in the fresco style, you know, and with fresco it's painted on wet plaster, and the pigments are applied to the wet plaster, so they're absorbed by the wall, and it's a very permanent way of painting. So even though this was painted in the early 16th century, it's still in very good shape today. And there's several more rooms like this, so we'll take our time. We'll take a few minutes in this room looking around and a few minutes in the next room looking around. But this one painting is really the key to understanding Raphael's works. As we conclude the program in the Sistine Chapel, I'd like to invite you to give us a call if you'd like some information about the Hawaii Geographic Society. This is probably the most important single piece, and it contains the scenes from the Bible. There's Genesis, there's the creation, certainly the most famous of all the panels, the creation. And the way Michelangelo was able to break up the ceiling into distinct clusters gives it a coherence and harmony that you wouldn't otherwise find. Originally the plan was just to paint a few scenes and then have a lot of architecture painted up there, the columns and arches and that sort of thing. But as Michelangelo got more and more into it, even though he wasn't pleased with his work, he didn't want to be here doing this, he still had that artistic passion to do it right, to do what was his inner voice was compelling him to do. And it was done as you see it here, and he kept working and working. He wouldn't let anybody come in to see it except the Pope could come in now and then and have a look at it. And for a few years, right, Raphael would sneak in now and then to have a peek at it, but it was done basically in secret. And then when it was finally revealed, the world was shocked. The Italian world was just overwhelmed and astonished at the beauty of this work. In secret. And then when it was finally revealed, the world was shocked. The Italian world was just overwhelmed and astonished at the beauty. We're not going to spend a lot of time in this room, just really to stand here and have a look at it. This is the Vatican Library. And in the old days, when this was the Pope's palace, this was the library where they had the manuscripts and rare books. And today it's really just a picture gallery on the walls. It's really such a splendid place. I think it rivals in many ways the Sistine Chapel itself. It's really decorative and really lively and very colorful. The ceilings, the architecture all blends together in a very interesting and lively composite whole. Vatican Library. More of these moving images. And this huge vase here, this gigantic urn, is quite a piece. But there's no single masterpiece in here. It's just the overall effect of the composition itself. So the next and really in the final goal of our visit here into the Vatican Museum is going to be the fine art painting gallery, the Pinoteca. And it contains very important masterpieces by Leonardo Da Vinci, by Caravaggio, by Raphael. And it's not a real big museum. It's nothing like what we've just come through, of course. It's called the Pinoteca. And it's just ahead. It's in a separate building through the gardens. And it's just 3:30 now. And I know you're all kind of tired after today. I feel about the same way. But it'll be worth it. You up for that?
Yes.
Oh, good. No rebellion yet. So let's go to the Pinoteca. We're about to go into the Pinacoteca, which is the painting gallery. And it's the building just to our left over here. And it has a lot of different rooms and galleries, and we're not going to try and see everything in there, of course. We'd be in there all day. So I'll just lead you through and we'll take a look at the highlights. This is Raphael. The Transfiguration is one of his most famous paintings. This is a painting you see in your Sunday supplements. You can buy it on a saucer and on a coffee cup. The Transfiguration. This is the original piece. And then to your right is the Coronation of the Virgin. Another real important painting by the great master Raphael. Raphael was a Baroque painter. And with the Baroque, you have this use of space where you have a lot of free-floating elements and S-curves and beautiful deep background to create this feeling of motion and life. And Titian also was a Venetian, Titian the Venetian. And we'll see more of his works, particularly in the same church of the Frari. We'll see the Assumption of the Virgin by Titian. This is another of the great masterpieces of the collection. It's the Descent from the Cross by Caravaggio. And it's one of his more powerful and dramatic pieces. You can see the hallmarks of Caravaggio's style being the bright highlights and the deep dark backgrounds, creating this contoured three-dimensional surface, almost popping off the canvas, coming at you. And notice the strong diagonal composition of the overall painting, going from the upper right to the bottom left. But it's not just a straight diagonal line. It's a very complex combination of bodies and positions, and of course culminating in the Christ and the descent from the cross. It's amazingly dramatic painting. You have a lot of S-curves in here too, which is another of the hallmarks of that Baroque style, where the eye just can constantly roam and wander through the painting. And yet the focal point is very much the face of Christ. Your eye would keep coming back to the face of Christ. No matter where you roam in the painting, it will once again come back to the passion and the torment of the crucifixion. Another typically Baroque painting depicts the martyrdom of St. Paul, who was crucified upside down. A model of the dome of St. Peter's is on exhibit that shows a cross-section of the inner dome and the outer dome. And you can look out the window and see the actual dome itself, one of the finest landmarks in the entire city. As we make our way down the spectacular spiral staircase, we leave the Vatican Museum and make our way back to our hotel.